This is DUNE Talk, a DUNENewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Welcome to our spoiler-free review of Dune Part 2. That's right, this is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Some team members have attended press screenings and we're getting into reactions right here on the 70th episode of Dune Talk. Yes, this is Marcus, your sleep-deprived editor at DUNENewsNet.com, and I'm here with, well, guess who else has seen the movie?
Hey everyone, Johnny Sobchak here once again. I can't believe it's finally happened. Dune Part 2. I've experienced it. All three of us have. And it's awesome for this to be the 70th episode. I think that's a suitable benchmark. And I think that this is going to be a really fun time going into some of the non-spoilery details, just as the release generally for everyone around the world is, just days away.
Hey, Simon Dowdy here. Yeah, episode 70. I was thinking about that earlier today. I was like, just perfect. Plans in plans. Can't believe that we're going to talk about it. I mean, I know it's going to be non-spoilery, but finally, I feel like since we started this show, before even part 1 came out, we were like, so if we get part 2, this is what's going to happen. And we got it. So I'm in a good mood. Baseball's back. Dune 2's out. It's a good time all around.
Dune Movie News.
This is so exciting. Yeah, as mentioned, I can't believe we're really here in February 2024 with half of the Dune Talk regulars having watched the Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 movie. I was already amped up with the first wave of social media reactions. Then, Johnny, on Wednesday morning, I finished editing your glowing written review for DUNENewsNet.com. And then I went online to see that the overall critics review score was already climbing past 95% positive on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's still going up. But yeah, at that point, it was really maximum levels of hype for me. I have to admit, however, after hearing some of the spoilers that we discussed just a couple of episodes back, I was also slightly apprehensive. Would I end up being disappointed by some of the adaptation's choices? Well, it's an understatement to see that this movie had a huge impact on me. An amazing big screen experience, and this press screening wasn't even in IMAX, so the spectacle can only get better from here. But I'll get into more details later. Co-hosts first. Johnny, you got to see the movie the day before us, so let's kick off with your reactions to watching Dune Part 2 for the first time.
Gosh, it's hard to put into words. I mean, I've been thinking about it, this movie, in general. I mean, we've been doing the show for several years at this point. I won't put a specific number on it, but it's just been such a journey. And then to get to actually sit down and watch it and to be so focused and fixated on it as a fan, as a movie fan, a Denis Villeneuve fan, a Dune fan, a sci-fi fan, just so many different convergences in terms of my interests, what I love in art. And I've thought in the last few days since I've seen the film, I've thought more about the movie now than I did before I saw it, which is kind of hard to believe because leading up to it, there's so much speculation. There's so many unknowns. You have a lot of promotional material to kind of sift through and get some idea or some semblance of what the film is going to be like when it actually plays out. But gosh, it's just such a different experience once you actually get in there. And I got to say, and I'm sure you'll both chime in, and I've seen this sentiment elsewhere already. But the biggest thing, one of the biggest things at least that comes to mind that I tweeted about shortly after seeing it is that it is so different. Part 1. I really can't overstate how different it is. And I don't even know if I can necessarily articulate the differences, but from the first less than 5 minutes, you can just see and feel the difference in the movie. It's like Villeneuve he's been not, necessarily trapped or confined necessarily, but part 1 is a very particular part of the story. It's a very particular type of movie. And it feels like with the success of that and with the events and the story that still has to play out in the back half of the novel, it just feels like he had all the freedom in the world to just change up his style, try some more daring or bold stylistic, choices. And in terms of the kind of movie that is, it's a war movie, right? And that's been said. He's really emphasized that. He's also emphasized that it's a love story. there's a love story in the backdrop of a war film between Paul and Chani, Timothy Chalamet and Zendaya as the pretty much co-leads. And then just such a star-studded cast all around and such great performances. But just really, that's the main thing I guess I'll just really lead off with is, and this is such a positive note on my part. I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way. It is such an interesting compliment and creates such an intriguing contrast between that first film and this one. And I think it's just such a fresh experience, despite you're already familiar with a lot of the characters, a lot of elements of the world, but just the way Greg Fraser, Joe Walker, the editor, Hans Zimmer, even with the score and the costume design, production design, like you've seen some of these things in the first one, or a lot of these things, but it just has a different energy, a different vibe. And it's really impressive because it's just the actual matter of making it. But then also I feel like the marketing, even if you've seen a lot of footage, even if you've seen a lot of behind the scenes, doesn't really get to the heart of just how different it is. As much as I love part one, and it's really its own thing, I think part two is a step above in a lot of ways, for several different reasons. So yeah, overall good things to say about it, obviously. And as Marcus pointed out, you can also read, for more my particular perspective, I did do a written review on DUNENewsNet.com. So definitely go check that out if you haven't seen it yet.
I was blown away right away. I was like, yes, this is a different movie, but yet it feels very familiar, if that makes sense. And, Joe Walker, Greg Fraser, the whole entire team, Denis. Funny, I was watching an interview that was done with French TV, and they were talking how to describe Denis in one word. And the actress that plays Chani's best friend was on there. And when they were learning Fremen, the word for God was Denis. So they actually, she said Denis. And I was like, and she's like, wait, no, but it means God in Fremen. So I was like, okay, that's kind of hilarious that so many years ago, Frank Herbert wrote that like that. But it's just like, sadly, we didn't see it in IMAX. My press screening with Marcus was just saw it, in regular, but I can't wait until the date this gets published, Sunday, to actually see it in IMAX and many, many other times.
Yeah. So getting back to my first reaction. So since you can only fit so much on an X post, here's slightly expanded my first reaction. I expected to watch the second half of the story of Dune on screen. Instead, I witnessed 2 hours and 45 minutes of the most stunning cinema since The Lord of the Rings. You may have heard of comparisons to The Empire Strikes Back, and those are fitting. Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 movie differs significantly from the book, for better and for worse, while beautifully bringing the story's key themes to new audiences. So yes, this movie really did blow me away. And when you're dealing with such a beloved classic story like Dune, no adaptation is going to be perfect. I do have plenty of criticisms, which I'll start getting into later in the show and more in our upcoming spoiler episodes. However, I can honestly say that, again, emphasizing, first of all, part two was better than part one. And secondly, this is the best in cinema experience that I've had since The Return of the King. And that's not in comparison that I make lightly, since The Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie trilogy of this century. To be clear, though, this comparison is in relation to the movie's epic scale, the cinematic achievements they represent, the impact that they have or will have on fantasy and science fiction genres, respectively. Make no mistake, though, Dune couldn't be any more different than the former story-wise or in its themes. So I'd say in terms of plot development, The Empire Strikes Back probably is closer. Still, though, it's funny. Like when I'm thinking about this, Dune Part 2 offers something new that we haven't quite seen something like this executed in this way before. And that's a great achievement in itself, considering that the Dune saga has influenced so many other stories that we've come back, seen in the past 50 plus years. So yeah, all around, really impressed.
Marcus, real quick, to your point there that you just made, I think that was something I was trying to, articulate in my initial reaction as well. In fact, I think the first tweet that I put out was just talking about how, Frank Herbert's novels have been around for decades, and it's inspired so many different major works. And we're talking about the biggest, franchises ever, from Star Wars to The Matrix to Avatar to, other fiction or genre, Game of Thrones, I think to some degree. And yet this still feels like fresh. It still feels like a cutting edge way of approaching this story and this way of telling it. And like you said, I mean, it's not even, I don't think it's an overstatement rather to say that this is like not really something that we've seen before. I mean, it's just not the tone, the style, the production, the way that it actually came together in a part one and then this part two and a potential third part kind of working together, with a sequel novel. The things they're doing visually, the effects and the cinematography, the sound design, the score, of course, from Hans Zimmer, which is inseparable from the films themselves, the images when you see them. Kind of back to my original point, like this is the granddaddy of all of them, basically. Lord of the Rings obviously predates Dune, but in terms of sci-fi, I mean, there's no more influential piece of fiction. And so, but for that to still Denis, for him to capture just a fresh vitality, and just having such a singular like through line. I mean, he's really a genius. I mean, I have to say, like the amount of thought and imagination, even though there is so much source material to pull from, it really, and Frank Herbert, I guess, to his credit, kind of leaves so much open for you to imagine and build your own interpretation. That's why I feel like in some of the criticisms, and you may have some of these later in the show, but I just think some book readers and Dune fans, whether it's fans of the Lynch version or Jodorowsky's ideas or whatever it may be, I feel like people really get fixated into a certain concept or idea of what Dune should be or how it should look, how it should feel is so malleable and can take so many different forms in terms of aesthetic. As long as you maintain the core of the story, the themes, the ideas that Herbert explores and cares about, I think that's the most important thing. And I think Villeneuve, I mean, he's cooking at a different like level with this movie. And that's another thing. It's so different from part one because the camera movements in this movie and the shot designs and what he's doing with, infrared and things like that. Like he really does feel like he's just open to more ideas and like he's trying to really experiment. And he's just adding and the action. I mean, we'll get more into that probably, but the way the action is designed, I mean, the stunts and the choreography and again, how the shot designs are worked into the action. And it's just all really, really impressive. And I'd not seen him do any of that before. I don't think really, and his other films don't really show that. And I think he needed to go through these other movies to get to this level work. And then mind you, this is all after seeing it one time. Like it made such an impression upon me, even with the high expectations that I had.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this just a couple of weeks ago. That discussion that Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve were having after that screening of Tenet, and Nolan was asking him how he created those visuals that weren't necessarily in the book, and he talked about the storyboarding elements. And if you read some of the interviews with Villeneuve, he's been thinking about this book and the dream to make this movie for a very long time. I would love to see a documentary at some stage about like how that came to fruition. And I'm just curious to see like are there maybe storyboards from when he was a teenager and like how much of those actually made it into the to the final movie.
Well, it's interesting because talking about the storyboards, the sand writing scene, which, most of us saw in the IMAX preview, if you saw part one again in the theater, there are storyboards that he drew. I think he was like 12 or 13, and it's almost shot per shot of what's on, film now. Obviously, he could go back and reference those, but like, I actually believe, and it's not the whole press hype. Oh, I've been a fan of this since I was a kid. Like, we've heard stories from people on the production that this is very important to him, and it shows. Denis, I imagine his French Canadian copy just falling apart as a kid and, highlighting stuff. And like something that I think it was Mark that said it when you guys were doing that show a couple of weeks ago, Denis didn't have the money for a camera. So he drew a lot of the storyboards. And that's how you imagine the story. I agree with you, Johnny. We often imagine stuff in our head. And this is how nerdy I am. I'm not gonna lie, the past couple nights before the screening, as I was trying to fall asleep, I was like, okay, so I would start it off like this, and then I would do this kind of shots, like try to visualize it in my head. But, and I think that's just a love of the source material. And Denis is the perfect person to make this trilogy because Messiah is going to happen, you know.
That's for sure. Like, I think we were sitting there after the movie, and like my first thought was like, yeah, Messiah has to happen. Like, especially with that ending, which we can't go into details.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. So next, let's get into our top highlights from the movie. Simon, let's start with you. What did you enjoy most in this movie, whether it's characters, scenes, or how certain elements were handled?
I'm a big fan of character development and I love Stilgard. Like I usually enjoy Stilgard when I read them in the books and all that. But Javier Bardem, for me, stole the show as Stilgard. Like I believe the accent and I believe his, I don't want to say love for Paul, but his vision of who Paul is. And we'll talk more about it when we do our spoiler episode. But just really his conviction that Paul is the Muad'Dib. You know, he is the one. Also, I keep going back and forth about this. Rebecca Ferguson, brilliant. Like, especially towards the end of the movie, the last hour, she is a whole different character than we saw in part one. Um, of course, the editing, the cinematography. But one or two, that's hard.
And it's funny, Simon, like talking about Stilgar. So like, I think Javier Bardem gave a great performance, but and well, maybe that's more of something we'll get into later. But actually, I didn't like as much the way the character was written itself. So that will be an interesting
That'll be
discussion
interesting. Yeah.
when we get to that. But yeah, I have to echo your shout outs to Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica. I mean, we've seen it in the trailers. She's going to take the water of life, and it's a dramatic transformation. And we can't go into details without spoilers, but this is a woman who's in a very different state of mind than we've seen in her first movie, and she portrayed it in such a convincing way. And unlike the book, where she's seen less in the final third, like as mentioned, she's present throughout, and yeah, like her actions matter. So I was really impressed with how Rebecca Ferguson performed as Lady Jessica.
I don't know, Marcus. I'll have to hear what you say about it, but I would tend to agree with Simon in terms of Stilgar and Javier Bardem. I thought he was really, yeah. I'm trying not to give anything away here, but he was really funny, and he had a great levity about him in the first half of the film or so, or the first kind of act. Super affable and but still you could see the respect. He still had that kind of air to him that he had in the first movie, but he's quickly overtaken, obviously, by Paul, just as he is in the book. Lady Jessica, I thought, was also incredible. I mean, she is definitely more prevalent in this than she is in this section of the novel, as you were kind of mentioning. But I mean, Rebecca Ferguson and her depiction, I mean, she is, she made me feel like nauseous, like watching her. I mean, that's the only way I can really describe it. She was too many other adjectives because I don't want to. It might be giving a little too much away, maybe. But yeah, she was very effective. Let's say that. For me, just two quick highlights of my own. I thought the editing was fantastic. I mean, Joe Walker. I mean, it's like, how do you continue to like put out this level of work? I mean, you could say about anyone involved with this movie. I mean, from every department, but Joe Walker, I mean, he has such a heavy hand in these films and in Villeneuve's filmography. And there are just so many, there's so many standout like edits, like genuine, like smart, like cuts that he uses throughout the film. But overall, just the way it's paced and his in Villeneuve's way that they really build out, I think, an appropriate amount of time, especially in correspondence with the novel in terms of like how certain things should be and getting a sense of certain characters, who they are, and certain, plot points. I thought it was handled really well. And I mean, this movie is 10 minutes longer than part one, and it feels like 20 minutes shorter, probably. would be like my estimation. Like it flew by. And that was my first time watching it. Generally, when you're watching something for the first time, doing anything for the first time, it feels like it's taking the longest it's probably ever going to take because you don't know it, familiar with it. But for me, I mean, this was like bam, like it was an appropriate wait. But I think I'll be curious to see how I feel about it on rewatch. And then the other main highlight, real quick, is the Harkonnens in this movie in Getty Prime. Holy cow. Like it is, I mean, if people were disappointed at all, or it felt like, they didn't do the Harkonnens justice in part one, or didn't spend enough time on Getty Prime or show enough of, certain characters. I mean, they get a nice chunk of movie uninterrupted on Getty Prime. You've seen the trailers, like, infrared, tones and everything. And it is so, I mean, it's like Mad Max. Like it is so cool. And the stuff that they do with the Baron and Feyd and Lady Margot and different characterizations, the designs, I mean, the production design, the technology they use, the score, the Harkonnen Arena track on the soundtrack might be my favorite. I've probably listened to it like an unhealthy amount today. It's its own kind of little chapter, which I think is really cool, and used to great effect. So that helps obviously introduce Feyd, who's such a crucial part of the movie. I think it's just a stellar character introduction.
We also have to, of course, address the movie's main characters. So Timothy and Chalamet and Zendaya give absolutely stellar performances as Paul and Shawnee, and as Denis Villeneuve mentioned, their love really is the beating heart of core of this movie. Although I would have liked to see just a bit more of moments earlier in their relationship. I would have to say, like overall, it developed really at the right pace within the time frame that the movie had. As mentioned, it felt like it passed by really fast, and there is really meaningful drama and tension here. And without spoiling things, their relationship goes in directions that you really don't expect. So, yeah, overall, beautiful performances from these two, and looking forward to see how things continue from here.
Like, that's a no-brainer. Like, you feel their love. You feel the tension of their relationship at certain points. And especially like the last act of the film, you really feel the tension between them. That's the way I'll leave it. But there's times where I was like, I'm watching these people fall in love. Like, it's not the Anakin and Padme Attack of the Clones Part 2, where it's like, I hate sand. It gets everywhere. Like when, Paul's talking to her about water on Caladan, you actually believe that Shawnee's like, shut up. That's not like that. There's not that much water out there in the world. And it's like you fall in love with these characters, you know, and Austin Butler as Faye is just everyone. But for me, it was Lady Jessica. Without going into full spoiler, and I know I've said this several times already, the last act with her still haunts me to this day. And I like Stilgard, so I'm really curious once we can start talking and seeing why Marcus had problems with the Stilgard character.
I thought, just real quick as well on the two leads, I thought that yes, the relationship was really well done. I wasn't sure how it was going to be handled. I mean, it's a tough line again to walk with those two characters, especially with Villeneuve kind of reimagining certain elements of their relationship. I was just very curious to see how he was going to do it, and I felt like yes, to Marcus, your point, I think it's so it is it's really well done how they come together and how they like develop their relationship. Like it feels very natural. And it feels like, it's two young people. And I think we can all relate to some degree, one way or another. Like when you're young and you have a crush on someone, or you're like, developing feelings for someone, it's, it's that kind of butterflies feeling. And I felt like they did a good job, like depicting that, like, especially like your first like romance or love. Like it's a very interesting, time in your life. And I feel like it was just to see that kind of relationship developed like pretty damn well in a movie of this scale. like not having that get lost and like all the spectacle and just all the other, important parts of the plot, I thought was really impressive. And I think it, for me, it shows that it works because by the end of the movie, it emotionally paid off. Zendaya is very good. I thought she um, has her own spin on Johnny, obviously, with the material that Villeneuve is giving her, and I think she does a very good job with it. Chalamet, though, I think he's incredible, and he's not done anything really like this before. So when you get to the third act and the things that he's doing and saying are happening, it's just like you feel like you're like shocked, like you feel like you're really along for the ride, kind of as it's careening out of control.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next section, I think we need to give some more attention to the end of the movie. So as I've said earlier, yeah, within the movie overall, like maybe the best experience that I've had like in cinema within the past 20 odd years. But the finale here is truly breathtaking. I'm talking, the last 15, 20 minutes, that sequence of events inside the Emperor's tent and then in the Arch residency. And yeah, we've seen quite a few bits and pieces of, in the trailers and teasers, the Emperor speaking, Paul taking control of the moment and using the voice, a fight between him and Feyd. I can assure you, though, there's so much more going on there, and like so much depth to every single character interaction and reaction. Like just a brilliantly edited series of events that literally had me on the edge of my seat. Yeah, throughout the sequence, it's really felt that like anything could happen. One side of my mind was basically calculating, is Villeneuve going to be able to throw a curveball where completely change the fate of a certain character? And so yeah, I would say like as mentioned, like it's very very hard for me to give a movie a perfect score, but like when just looking at the finale itself, that definitely approached perfection, and I can't wait for our breakdown on when we reach that point in scene by scene review.
I text my wife, "Hey, done with the movie," and she asked me, "How was it?" I text her back different. She's like, "So you don't want to see it again?" Like, kind of like, "No, no, no." I was like, it's good. I'll explain to you later." But there's a couple moments like in the Emperor's tent where I was like, "Oh, we're doing that. Okay, that works." I didn't think we were going to do that, but that was interesting.
But yes, you're so right. Like I really was on the edge of my seat. Like I really wasn't sure like what the hell was going to happen. And it's really a testament to the direction of the movie. Like I thought that a certain character was going to die, and I was like, "Wait, what the hell is going on?" I have no idea what to. I don't know why I'm on the edge of my seat right now. And also just with certain changes, Simon, you said it's different. That's for sure. Um, but I liked it. I liked that. I was like, wow, this is surprising. It's all about the execution. If the execution is well done and I feel like it makes sense and, it's just different from, prior iteration or the source material, I don't mind that. In fact, I will like it probably a little bit more because it's just a different version of the story. It's something that's just new that you can kind of experience in its own right. And so I really, really liked that about the last, as you said, 30 minutes or so. Because it is really epic. It's really edge of your seat. And I think certainly for people that aren't familiar with the book or prior iterations of Dune, I mean, general audiences are going to be like freaking out because they're really going to have like no idea what's going to happen or go down. So, yeah, I think just very well done. You got to stick the landing. And I think they did that with, flying colors.
Yeah, so we've been heaping up a lot of praise on the movie. So let's go into some of the more criticisms we potentially have from the movie. And at least from my perspective, it comes close, but this isn't perfect. And just to give some context, you may have heard me say it here before, but my belief is that you really need a 10 plus hour prestige series like on HBO or something to really do the full story justice. And I have to say, like after watching these two films so far, from Denis Villeneuve Dune, I'm even more convinced of that. I mean, I don't think any adaptation of Dune in film format could achieve perfection, but I am actually like a bit hopeful that the third movie, Dune Messiah Part 3 or whatever, will prove me wrong because that's a shorter book to adopt, and I can see it working really well in film format. Um, but yeah, Johnny, as a Films Critic Association member, you cover a much wider range of genres than I do. So I'm especially to hear your thoughts on elements or scenes that either you enjoyed least, or maybe you thought were areas of improvements, like however you want to approach it, whether it's the artistic or technical side.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that, Marcus. I also appreciate it. I forgot to say this to you privately, but I'll say it here. You shared our review on my review from our website on Reddit, on the Dune Reddit. And you came to my defense very gallantly in the comments, and everyone kind of was backing you. So I appreciated that. But yes, to your point though, so I don't know if this is controversial. I don't know if it's a hot take. I love the book. I read it before watching the David Lynch version because I still have not seen the David Lynch version as of right now. I'm going to watch it in the next couple of weeks now that I've seen the second film. Um, but I like they all exist to me in like their own separate and like realities. Like I really look at the films as like the films, and I look at the book as the book. I really love the book. I really love the movies. For me as an experience, like, and I said this to someone on Reddit actually earlier today because they were asking, generally what I thought about the movie. And really what I said to them, I'll just say now is there are certain little things, certain characters, certain little plot points that would have been really cool or nice to see included in this movie, just as it would have been nice to see included in part one. For example, as part one, you know, Dr. Yui, if we gotten maybe one or two more little scenes with him, it would have bumped that character up a little bit, given him a little bit more, impact, get made that, series of events, a little bit more impactful. But for me, that didn't really detract from it very much. Maybe because I just know it in my mind from the book, or just because I didn't care for the character that much. In this, I feel like, and there's a couple other instances of that, I think in part one that I feel, or I could see the logic there. In part two, I really, and this is why I said earlier, to this person, I said, it would have been nice to include maybe a couple of little things here and there, but to me, not having them or having certain changes to like accommodate the movie or like the form overall, I didn't really miss that much personally. And for me, in terms of it being a movie and like a cinematic experience, like there's really not much more I can ask for in that type of experience. That's not to say it's like perfection necessarily. I think it's a 5 out of 5. I think it's an incredible, sci-fi masterpiece. But in terms of things that maybe could have been a little bit better, I mean, there's just it's and some of this it's hard to not go into spoilers about. I guess is one thing I will say. Um, Maybe certain. Uh, the thing is, I've been thinking about the movie so much, I can see the logic of certain things, and they like almost appeal to me more because I've thought about it a certain way. Whereas when I was watching it initially in the theater, I was like, I don't know how I feel about that necessarily, or maybe that could have been a little bit different. I did think that a couple times watching the movie. I need to see it again to see if that kind of sticks around. But I've been talking to a lot of people about this movie and going into more detail and kind of processing it. And the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, the more I love it. The more that I like, okay, I really feel like this is what they were going for here. Like this makes sense. Or like it's kind of a translation of what you see in the book. As it stands, I really didn't have like too much to complain about. I walked out and some of the things I thought about before the movie, like, I wonder who this is going to be, or is that character going to be doing this or included here? I didn't think about any of that while I was watching the movie. I didn't even realize certain characters are not, doing certain things are there until someone asked me about it an hour after I saw the movie. So I think that's it. And that's why, I'm curious to hear more, Marcus, about your thoughts on Stilgar, like maybe things that Simon, had thoughts about. And Garen, I mean, I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what Garen thinks because he's been so anxious, I feel like, about the different changes. And there are quite a few changes in this movie. So, and I've been saying that to people on Discord and Reddit, like, you just gotta, yeah, I know you're sharing these things. You're like, certain things seem a certain way. Like, that's cool. Like, however you feel about it. But I'd say, like, just go in with an open mind.
And I think that's fair to say, Johnny. I almost feel that you can give, and maybe we'll get into that like at the very end when we give our final scores. Well, you've mentioned yours since you wrote the review already, but it's almost like you can give this movie a review as a movie itself. And as I mentioned, like I've given it high praise comparing to like some of the best movies in the past 20 years. But then you can also give this movie a rating of like how well does it adapt Dune, and those could be potentially different ratings, and you could
Yeah.
still they could still apply here. But yeah, Simon, first I want to hear, how about you? What would you like to have seen different, or what didn't work as well for you?
I agree with both of you and everyone that's ever been on this show. An HBO series would be ideal because there is so much source material that you can draw from. I mean, like one of the scenes I was hoping that we would have gotten in the first film is drunken uh Duncan Idaho. And that could be an episode just by itself of the mini series, Some of my low points, I don't know. There's one shot that really doesn't bother me, but I'm like, we didn't really need that shot towards the end of the movie. And can't talk about it right now because we're in our spoiler-free mode. Um, but is it a perfect film? No. For me, there's only one perfect film ever, and that's Lawrence of Arabia. Like that movie is like filmmaking at its best. Like that's a that's 1,000 out of 1,000 for me. Is Dune Part Two one of my favorite films of all time? Right now, I'm on the hype of it. So of course, I love Dune. I've been in love with this franchise for 40 years. I'm going to be 46 in May, so I've been since I was a little kid getting those stupid action figures back in the day. But I will say that without going into spoiler mode, I do like how the Harkonnen soldiers look when they're on Arrakis, especially if you're a David Lynch fan of that 84 movie, pays homage to that. But I don't know, there's points where I feel maybe like a shot could have been a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more character development. Like, would I have liked to see more Feyd-Rautha? Yes. I loved in part two. Do I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread? No. But do I give it a really high score? Yes. So, in time, I would be curious to go back and revisit it in 6 months when it's on home release. Like, what do we think of it after the hype? If that makes any sense, or if I was just rambling on.
And I think I mentioned this even with part one as well when we were talking about it. There is a really narrow focus when it comes to the world building. So we get to experience the intimate details of our main characters and their surroundings. But of course, our main characters are nobles. They're the rulers or the leaders of their tribe. In the case of the Fremen. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to go back by shot and catch so many small details that we missed in the first couple of viewings. And we also do get some shots that are, the definition of epic, whether it's the sandworm attack on, at the end, or other parts of the Battle of Erskine. On the other hand, we don't really get glimpses of what's going on in neighboring areas, let alone the Imperium as a whole. So in terms of world building, it sometimes makes the story feel like more self-contained. We're not seeing like how these massive events are impacting people outside of our core characters, and that's partly by design. I'll give you that, because also in the book, we don't learn how things are for the citizens of the Imperium, right? It's like you're razor focused on these core characters and what's happening. But for example, I would have liked to see much more of Kaitain. I mean, that was maybe one of the things that I was disappointed by. Like, we didn't get as much of Kaitain as we did from Arrakis and Gedi Prime. We didn't get any, like, shots of the city. I mean, this is the center of the Imperium. There's so much going on there. Um, or for example, in Erskine, how was life like there under the oppressive rule of the Harkonnens? I mean, it's not like you have to, like, put in a scene or like some a subplot anywhere, but you can, just show some scene on the streets, some Harkonnen soldiers walking by and seeing like how, whoever's still living there, they're probably having a very bad time. So at least for me, that would have made the experience much more immersive if we were like expanding the world building up a little bit more.
But I do understand, like, you want to get a little bit more of a glimpse of like the wider outside world. But yeah, I see both sides of it. But yeah, no, I definitely hear you there. And I think um that's something in a different format, I think would be really cool to explore if and when that ever happens, do a series or a different adaptation, maybe.
I think we're going to see more of the city life when we get Messiah. Because it's
Yes,
going to be so
100%.
important to be in the grounded level. And maybe that's what Denise saving is for. But I agree, like a little 30-second clip. How hard is it to shoot that and just show like a couple Harkonnen soldiers walking by? I mean, for God's sake, Star Wars does it how many times with stormtroopers?
So then we've also alluded to in our up to now that there is a topic of differences between this movie and the book that inspired it. And yeah, so this is certainly not like the sci-fi Dune miniseries from 2000 where they sought to faithfully adapt every event from the book. Um, and going back to my earlier comparison with The Lord of the Rings, their director Peter Jackson had explicitly talked about how their goal was to bring Tolkien's work as faithfully as possible to the big screen. And of course, there were changes and cuts to that movie, but I mean, to be clear, that doesn't compare to the transformation we're seeing now in Dune Part 2. And in my view, this new movie is not Frank Herbert's Dune. This is Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and he's made some very bold choices with adapting the source material. The good news here is that he's a director who's shown how much he loves the original story and also very, very deeply understands the themes that are here. So, Simon, as you mentioned, you got into Dune with the toys and the 1984 film, and you've read the book many times, and your initial reaction was, "This is different." And yeah, I mean, like that's a word that came up often. So, having some time to process everything, like just and we can't go into spoilers yet, but like how do you feel overall about those differences? Like, was it too much? Do you think you would like to see less differences? Like, are you overall at peace with some of the things that were changed, missed opportunities?
I was actually so as they were happening, I was like, "Ah, I'm okay with this." Then later that night, I was like, I don't know." And now that I've had a couple of days to think about it, you're right. It's not Frank Herbert's Dune. It's Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Without going into full spoilers again, it's hard. Certain characters are not there, but they are there. You feel their presence. And I'm okay with the changes. Like, honestly, I am because I feel like Dune is one of those tales that people will tell over generations, very much like Star Wars. Star Wars has changed so much over time, and it'll become kind of like legends, like folk tales. And maybe the folktale of Paul Atreides of Muad'Dib will have Denis' version of it and David Lynch's version and the sci-fi version. It's still true to what Frank wrote about so many years ago, and it's important that the message is still there. And I feel like the message is even stronger in this version.
The thing that comes into my mind is the legend of King Arthur there, and it's had many iterations over the centuries. And you see there, like there's a King Arthur film maybe like every decade, and it tells a completely different story, but the elements of it are there. And like there's the vision of a different director or a different writer, but the core elements you understand what's going on there, and it portrays the story in a different way. But yeah, that's the idea. It's legends, and I can definitely see Dune becoming that type of story where, in hundreds years now, it's like a legend. There was the original novel that was written by Frank Herbert in 1965, but it's still being reimagined and reborn every, couple of decades for centuries to come. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marcus and Simon. The difference is that were there, I felt I enjoyed, or like I liked that it was surprising to me, that it was something that I wasn't expecting. And for me, if you're doing an adaptation, like that's something that I think you should try to go for, at least in certain dosages, maybe.
Yeah, and I think the part of me that's maybe still torn in some ways that I think I can agree with you, Johnny, that like the changes that were there, like when I was watching them, I really enjoyed it, and I thought, okay, this really works. This is a really good job. I'm really enjoying this movie. This is beautifully done. At the same time, um, I guess I'll have to see it a few more times. I have to think like, were these changes necessary? Like, what was it like made? Because the director had a certain vision and he wanted to do things his way. But like, could he have like stayed more faithful in certain regards and still gotten the same effect? I think that's a question that I'm going to have to like tackle over the next weeks as I see the movie in IMAX and many more times. But yeah, like I can totally understand if people like are taken aback in some way. They're like, okay, this is changed. Like, why did it have to be changed? Couldn't they approach it a different way? So I think that's gonna be some fascinating discussions.
It's really hard to say or like ask that question almost, I feel, because the alternatives are so varied and so challenging, I feel like, in a lot of ways. Like, it's hard to, like, for me, in my opinion, like, it's hard to get too mad or like bothered about certain ways that there decisions that were made, I guess, about how to approach certain things. Cause it's like, it's such a can of worms. And I just like, it's hard to put yourself in that position to like make the decisions and like decide how everything's going to be done on screen. But that's obviously why we're not making, the movie, and they have the real big geniuses doing it. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, it is a tough, a line to walk. I feel like that's the one thing that keeps saying with an adaptation of Dune, or any adaptation really, but with something that's so big and so specific, it's hard to just strike that right balance. I think if you can just stay a little bit more balanced than not, I think you kind of win. And I think that's just how I feel generally, I guess, about the movie.
Johnny, about what you're talking about, what we can't talk about, as someone that was looking forward to that, I actually love the changes they made to it and how they wrote that character into the story.
Right. Okay. I'm glad to hear that, Simon, because again, with you, Marcus, Garen, like, again, I'm the young fish in the pond, I feel like, on this show, obviously. So that's why I was very curious. I mean, while I was watching it, because I was the first one to see it, I'm just thinking in the back of my head, kind of like, wonder what Garen's going to think about that.
Oh, there's a couple of moments where I cannot wait to hear what Garen thinks.
Yeah.
Garen, if you're watching this or listening to it, go watch the movie. I know you gotta wait till opening day, sadly.
But yeah, no, I hear you there. So, but I'm glad that you felt that way, because I could definitely see a very number of opinions about it, and among other things.
Yeah, and I do want to say, like, for people who are going to watch the movie soon, I mean, even if you've been a fan of the book for years, and you read the book 20 times, I mean, I think it is going to be totally acceptable if like, you look at these changes and you do think, okay, like, I didn't like the way that was handled. I think that's perfectly fair view. And as mentioned, there are a couple of things that I'm torn on. I do like actually how they handled a specific character. But I do wonder, like, did they have to go that way, or could they have stayed more faithful to the book and gotten to the same points? But yeah, like, I think the most important thing for me at the end of the movie, and I'm going back to the comment I made a couple episodes back, is that at the end of the day, Villeneuve did stick to landing. So there are these really core important themes of Dune, like, as Philly would talking in the interviews, like the message of the dangers of charismatic leaders and fanaticism, and how that can be, really dangerous to society, and you need to really, like, understand that your heroes may not be who you think they are. It's such an important message for people today, like, whatever country you're in, or whatever parts of society. I think it just speaks on so many levels to things that are happening in the world. So yeah, like, I think, overall, I'm just ecstatic that it came out that way.
Can we just do the spoiler episode now?
Yeah, let's go right away.
Yeah, Marcus, though, I think, I mean, you're spot on. No matter, I think that's the big thing. I mean, I totally understand certain people, fans of the novel, other adaptations. There are going to be big differences to overcome, or like things that you're just not going to prefer, not like as much, and that's totally fair. But I agree with you. I think ultimately, and I said this, I'm not sure if I said it to someone on Twitter or Discord or Reddit, but bottom line of what I was saying is, I have a really hard time imagining a Dune fan watching this movie and not liking it. Even if they don't like certain things about it, I think overall, especially with the way they stick the landing and the final, because the end of a movie or any work of art that has some sort of duration or length to it, if you don't hit the right note at the end, it's like, well, what was it all for? You know what I mean? I mean, just ask Game of Thrones, and the fact that we're getting something like this on as high profile as you said. I mean, they just posted on Fandango, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, but they've sold twice as many tickets for Dune Part 2 already up to this point than they did for Part 1.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Final scores. So, Johnny, I assume you haven't changed your final score, so I'm just going to give you a minute to defend why you're giving
But you
5 stars.
Yeah, real quick, you can go read my full written review on DUNE.com. Certainly appreciate you giving some time to that. But overall, I said this earlier in the show, I can't really ask for much more in a film. Like, this is everything that I love to see in movies. That's why a lot of times I feel if you can have a big budget movie, have great character work, great writing, great cinematography, editing, the formal elements of what makes cinema like so interesting and exciting, and you can put that in a budget of $200 million or something, like that's like the peak, I think, of what can be accomplished. And that's what we're seeing here. This is really like a singular, very rare type of movie, I think. And even if there are any quibbles or qualms that I have with it, or anyone here on the show or anyone else that watches it has, I just really can't poke too many holes in it. So that's why initially walking out of the theater and after sleeping on it and writing my reviews and really putting a lot of thought into it in the last couple of days, I haven't wavered. As I said, I have just come to appreciate it. And the thought processes, I think, are just really cementing in my brain. So yeah, 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10.
Simon, how about you?
I still give it 5 popcorn buckets out of 5 popcorn buckets. And no, I did not buy a popcorn bucket. I do not want one. That thing is terrifying and scary, very much like the last 40 minutes of this movie. And it still haunts me, but in a good way. Like I said, right now I'm riding that train, loving everything about it, excited that it's here, curious to go see it again when it'll be out on home release. First, I'll buy the 4K. I'll buy the digital before it even comes out physical media, even if no one carries physical media anymore. But I can't wait to see it again and see it with a fresh eye and not being like u- uber sensitive to it the first time and being like, is this perfect? Is this how I imagine it? So I just 5 out of 5. Yep.
Oh, okay. So actually, I guess then I'm giving it the lowest score of the three of us. So just to give some context, back in 2021, I gave part one 4 stars, and I already at that point said that this is like I was already feeling that this is going to be the movie series of our generation. Like I was already thinking along that lines. I'm going to give part two 4.5 stars. So as mentioned, it's not a perfect movie, but in terms of I have to rate it as a movie, and as a movie, this really nearly approached perfection. There was like amazing characters, great performances, great sounds, soundtrack, amazing visual experience, and as mentioned, we still have to see it on IMAX still. Um, so I think it goes back to the point of, could it have been, could there have been a better Dune adaptation? Yes, like as mentioned, longer TV series, or what if Denis Villeneuve had been able to tell this story in 3 movies instead of 2? Just like how the book is split up into three books within a book. What if each of those were a movie? That could have been amazing. We wouldn't have to worry about deleted scenes or anything like we mentioned in part one. But then as a movie, like I haven't had an experience like this. This is just excellence. So 4.5 stars for me. So that was our spoiler review, and next up is a big discussion, spoiler reactions, and then of course after that we're going to be spending 4 or 5 episodes, potentially even more, on this movie, analyzing in great depth, going through shot by shot. For now, let's go ahead and sign off.
Hey, thank you again for everyone that joins us. Thank you for the interactions on YouTube, on all the social media. You can find me at S Dowdy on all of them. I can't wait until we get in full spoiler mode so we can talk about stuff that we loved, that we hated, but and why Marcus doesn't like Stilgard.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, once again for tuning in. This is the most fun time of the last several years, finally getting into this movie, and hopefully you enjoyed our spoiler-free discussion. But definitely stick around. There's going to be a lot of fun, exciting discussion, maybe a little debate, just to see where everyone falls on it. But yeah, I'm really excited for everyone to get to experience this. I've been thinking about it nonstop. I cannot wait to see it again. in IMAX, especially, as we say, because I got the Dolby experience the first time. So stay tuned and appreciate it. Check out the written review on the website as well if you haven't yet.
This was Marcus Gabriel. You can find me at Marcus's Writing, and of course, writing on DuneTalk.com. So yeah, as mentioned, a lot more to come on Dune Talk in the next week and in March. Yeah, for now, until the next one, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.